Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. What a great day this has been so far. If you were here this morning, you remember that we started with a fantastic fireside chat with Dr. Ibram X. Kendi in conversation with King County Regional Homelessness Authority CEO Mark Dones. And I want to make a plug that if you missed that session, you definitely missed out. Please, I encourage you to watch it in the recorded sessions. For both of today's keynotes, this morning and now, we are bringing together participants from the Housing Washington Conference and the Conference on Ending Homelessness. So we're thrilled to be bringing together over 2,000 people from all across Washington state who are working to end homelessness and create more affordable homes. This, as you may know, is the closing session of the Housing Washington Conference, and it's our second plenary of the on the first day of the three-day Conference on Ending Homelessness. And we hope to continue to partner and learn from each other at future conferences, maybe even in person. And again, I'm so glad you're all here today. I want to just take a brief second to say thank you and recognize the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, who was a cornerstone sponsor of the 2021 Conference on Ending Homelessness. This event wouldn't be possible without their support and partnership. So to Steve and everyone at the commission, thank you. And now it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce someone that many of you know from his work as Secretary of HUD during the Obama administration and his ongoing work on behalf of all Americans seeking affordable, safe housing, Julián Castro. Julián is the former mayor of San Antonio, and so he understands how to get things done from the national level to the city level. Today, Mr. Castro is on the LBJ Foundation board and is a political analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. And I want to say that as we were prepping for this, someone used the term starstruck. I will admit to being a little starstruck here. Please join me in warmly welcoming a longtime friend of housing, equity, and human services, Mr. Julián Castro.
Hey, y'all. First of all, Rachel, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, more importantly, for all of the tremendous work that you're doing in Washington. Thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. Hello from Texas. I'm in San Antonio, where it's getting up to 91 degrees today. Hopefully, y'all are having better weather. In fact, I wish that we could be doing this in person because I've always had a wonderful time getting to visit the state of Washington. And I remember when I was HUD secretary, having the opportunity on several occasions to get out to the state, whether visiting with then Representative Denny Heck in his 10th congressional district at a forum in Fife about housing affordability and homelessness, or visiting Seattle to look at the challenges the city was facing, creating more affordable housing and grappling with the issue of homelessness in full, along with other West Coast communities. And visiting Seattle again for the American Planning Association. When I think of Washington, I think of a state that in so many ways represents the future of our country, a state that is diverse, a state that is growing, a state that is young, a state that has looked at the different challenges it faces and that our nation faces, including in the realm of housing, and tried to apply creative solutions, innovative solutions to it. And I want to thank each and every one of you for all of the work that I know that you're doing day in and day out to provide a safe, decent, affordable place to live for people who need it. What can we say about the last 18 months that we've lived through? These last 18 months have been unlike anything any of us have ever seen in our lives. They've been unlike anything that our nation has been through, at least in a century. And I think that there are many lessons that we're going to learn as a nation as we look back and understand better what we've just been through. Many experiences that I hope have taught us something. But one of the lessons that I hope that we're going to take from it, and that I bet a lot of y'all feel, is how clear it has become that we're all in this together. That what happens to the most vulnerable people in our society affects all of us. Whether it's folks who are sleeping on the street, jobless, or folks who are working as farm workers in a field, or people working in meatpacking plants, or essential healthcare workers laboring to make sure that people are healthy and can recover from COVID. All of us are intimately connected like never before in so many ways. And to me, my hope at least is that that kernel of understanding is something that is more widely shared today than it was before the pandemic. And that most importantly, that understanding is going to lead to action, to work so that every single person in this country can live a life of dignity. You know, over the last several years, I bet that if you polled Americans, more folks believe and see healthcare, for instance, as a human right than they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's my hope that in this country, we're accelerating toward recognizing and treating housing as a human right. I believe that this is a special moment that we have to take advantage of in a good way. A moment when we can build a stronger coalition to treat housing as a human right, to make the investments that need to be made so that everybody has a safe, decent, affordable place to live, and change the policies that need to be changed to make that true. And so what I see in front of us is a lot of work to do, but also a lot of opportunity and a lot of hope. There are things that we need to do immediately and things that we need to do in the longer term. Immediately, I don't have to tell anybody on this Zoom that we have a housing affordability crisis. We had that housing affordability crisis well before this pandemic. I'm sure in Washington, y'all were seeing not only in big cities like Seattle, but also in smaller communities across the state, rents rising, homelessness in many places increasing, the ability of folks to afford that safe, decent place to live was dwindling. Right now, as we still grapple with this pandemic, we need to make sure that we do what we can with state level or at least local level eviction moratoria, and importantly, getting rental assistance dollars that Congress has allocated into the hands of people who need them, of tenants and landlords, so that tenants can stay in their homes. That we ensure that people are able to stay in their homes if they're on a mortgage as well, so that we stabilize the lives of individuals and families across the state of Washington and across this country during this pandemic. That's the short-term need that we have. But as much as we're focused on that on a day-to-day basis, I know that you have done tremendous work and a lot of thinking, and this conference ultimately is about not just the short term, but the long term. Housing is so important, not only because it's about a roof over somebody's head, but because, as you know, housing is foundational to stability in somebody's life. Somebody who has a stable place to live is much more likely to hold down a job. A kid is much more likely to get a decent education if they're well housed. People's health is literally better, of course, when they have somewhere to live versus when they don't. Physical health and mental health. And so when we make a long-term investment in housing, we make an investment not only in individuals and families, and not only on bricks and mortar, but on our future, on the prosperity that this nation can achieve. So what do we have to do going forward? How can we use this moment where there's the potential to build more support for housing investment as a pivot point to actually do that? The first thing we need to recognize is that every level of government and also the private sector and the nonprofit sector have their role to play in amplifying housing opportunity. At the federal level, the passage of the American Rescue Plan of nearly $47 billion in rental assistance, and in the Build Back Better plan, the reconciliation budget that promises up to just over $300 billion in federal investment in affordable housing, is an exciting opportunity that we have not seen in decades to catalyze important investment in communities all over Washington and this country, in cities big and small, and rural areas, in people of all different backgrounds everywhere in our nation. And so we're living through this time period that we probably have not seen since the 1970s at least, where we may actually be putting our money where our mouth is. The federal government must continue to step up to do that, to invest those dollars that are needed to create the housing supply out there, to catch up with the needs that communities all over your state, my state, and every state has. In addition to that, though, we know that the federal government can't do it alone. I'm pleased to hear that the state of Washington, its legislature, has stepped up and invested resources of its own, gone above and beyond recently to create more affordable housing opportunity. That's a blueprint for state legislatures across this country. State level participation also means that state housing financing agencies are as collaborative as possible and as creative in trying to make those dollars stretch as far as they can, and working with local communities to question the old models and understand how we can best make investments in partnership between the state level and local level. And at the local level, there's so much work to do. I had the benefit of serving as a city councilman in San Antonio for 4 years and serving as mayor of my hometown for 5 years. And for cities, the challenge is often one of resources. There is no way that cities can tackle homelessness or housing affordability in general alone. But we know that there are a lot of impactful things that local communities can do. I applaud local communities in the state of Washington that have put their own eviction moratoria in place. I applaud communities that have been creative with federal dollars to meet the needs of people who are homeless, to follow best practices and ensure that people are able to get to permanent supportive housing. I also know that we have to have tough conversations and pass sometimes tough policies at the local level that too often, unfortunately, go against the sentiment of people who push back against the creation of affordable housing. Look, I served in local government, as I said, and I sat week in and week out in zoning commission appeals and hearings. Sometimes it was difficult to tell the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats that would come up among residents and resist any investment in low-income housing in their neighborhood. At the local level, we need land use policies that avoid the pitfalls of NIMBYism. They're sensitive to environmental concerns and other concerns, but that don't give in to the old myths about low-income housing and the folks who live in them. We also need not just the big cities, but suburbs to take seriously their role as providers of public housing and also private affordable housing opportunities. That hasn't been the case in our country. During my time as HUD Secretary, we did something called Prosperity Playbook. We launched it in 5 different regions across the country, and the idea was to get the big cities working with the suburbs around them to jointly tackle issues like housing affordability and also transit and a number of other things. But underlying that was this recognition that if we're truly going to meet the challenge of ending homelessness in our country, of providing a safe, decent place to live for everybody, we're only going to do it if not just the big city, but also those communities around that big city are doing their part. And here's the thing. During the last 4 years, in suburban communities, counties that are adjacent to big cities throughout this country, you've had more folks who are progressive. And I don't want to just put this in partisan terms, but frankly, more Democrats who were elected to suburban city councils and county councils. So you have a glimmer of hope of folks who in those policymaking positions may be more aligned on those bodies than they have been in forever, maybe ever, with the concerns of the big city, and maybe at least more willing to listen to the argument about creating affordable housing for the first time in their communities. That's an important conversation to have. And I hope that both sides, from the big city to the small towns, those suburban towns, as policymakers, collaborate towards solving these challenges. It also means that at the state level, those organizations in the nonprofit world and state housing finance agencies have a role to play in trying to convene with these new opportunities to hopefully get new work done. We also know that too oftentimes, even when affordable housing investments are made, that the neediest, most vulnerable people don't get that opportunity. If indeed we get an investment in the coming months, coming years of hundreds of billions of dollars in affordable housing investment, it's time to make sure that the neediest folks do get those investments. What do I mean by that? We know that analysis after analysis has shown that the biggest gap in housing that is affordable exists for people who are extremely low income, people who make less than 30% of area median income. There are wonderful investments and more investments that need to be made for folks who are making 80% of area median income, 60% of area median income, between 30 and 60% of area median income. But it's absolutely urgent that we invest in extremely low income individuals, that we question what we've been doing. Take a look at the old models, see where we can be more creative, see where we can make the dollars and resources stretch further, and take advantage of the fact that we have more dollars, or will likely have more dollars, whether it's 300 billion, 200 billion, 150 billion dollars, many more dollars than before, to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. When it comes to doing that, it's also important that we continue to put teeth into the Fair Housing Act. One of the things that I'm proudest of when I was HUD Secretary is that we got affirmatively furthering fair housing past the finish line to live up to the obligation of the 1968 Fair Housing Act to ensure that communities that get federal taxpayer dollars through HUD have a plan for ensuring equal housing opportunity in their community. As the folks on this Zoom know, unfortunately, that was put on pause during the Trump administration. But of course, under the Biden administration, we're going again in the right direction. I know that there has been some tension over the years between some local communities and the federal government about what AFFH should look like. How bureaucratic should it or shouldn't it be? How much should it actually require? And from my time at HUD, I know that anytime you put more requirements on local communities, and I saw this as mayor as well, Anytime you put more requirements on local communities, you always get a little bit of pushback. But what I hope is that communities in the state of Washington, both big and small, will take seriously the obligations under AFFH and go above and beyond to put together plans that will help stamp out housing discrimination, further desegregate both the big cities and smaller towns, and offer housing in America that truly is open for everyone and that breaks out of the old patterns of segregation that too oftentimes have also led to worse education outcomes, worse employment outcomes, worse health outcomes for far too many people, especially folks in communities of color and traditionally disadvantaged communities. I know that there are so many people in the state of Washington who are committed to doing the right thing. And now is the time to put your foot on the gas, especially now I'm speaking to those policymakers at the local level in cities and counties and housing authorities, and also to all of you who work in this realm, who have their ear and also know how to apply pressure productively. Now is the time to ensure that we live up to the potential of the Fair Housing Act with an administration that will support that. As we do that, just two last things. First, I'm convinced that it's time for us to recognize the value of the public sector in providing housing opportunity like we haven't in decades. I'm a big fan of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, a big fan of things like FHA that has supported so much home ownership opportunity since its founding in 1934, of the participation of the private sector, which must continue to participate and has a role to play. Our developers out there who are doing affordable housing units and have been doing great work for years. But I also believe, and I think many of you know, that somewhere along the way, we lost our appetite, I think unjustly, for doing public housing right. The rise in rents, the spike in rents across this country is a very powerful reminder that people have been priced out of markets very, very quickly, all over Washington and all over this country. And one of the ways that I believe that we can better control that is to make sure that we have an ample supply of good, safe, affordable public housing. Right now, unfortunately, we lose more than 10,000 units of public housing to disrepair every year. And we have tens of billions of dollars of backlog and maintenance needs in public housing. The state of Washington is fortunate because it has some of the best public housing authorities and most creative and innovative in the entire nation. And my hope is that as we move forward with the Build Back Better agenda, and as states take those dollars and make choices about how to distribute resources, that the value of the public sector will be recognized like we haven't recognized it in 40 years. Finally, as we do all of these things, we know that people don't live their lives in silos. And that in the public sector, the nonprofit sector, or in the private sector, that we can't address issues in silos. Some of the most promising work that has been done over the last several years has been done when we try and connect the dots of opportunity by connecting those issues, whether it's Choice Neighborhoods or Promise Neighborhoods initiative or other initiatives in other administrations. Those initiatives that have sought to connect what we're doing with housing to education, to transit, to economic development, to health and wellness, to environment, those stand the best potential, I'm convinced, for holistically lifting up individuals, families, and communities. And so if I had one wish for communities big and small there in the state of Washington, it would be that for at least 6 hours on one day that the housing authority director, the school district superintendent, the mayor of the city, the county executive, the utility district director, the community college president, and other local officials get in a room with stakeholders in neighborhoods that are the most distressed in an area, with maps on the wall of the investment that these different public institutions are making in those communities, to collectively understand both the investments and the gaps that exist, and to dream together with the community, with their input about what can be and what should be. You would think that that kind of thing happens all the time, but it really doesn't. And because of that, we keep working too often in these silos and not making the most of everything that all of us are doing in these different fields, through these different organizations, with these different dollars from local government, state government, federal government, and the private sector to make a difference. Communities that can come together and see it plainly and get community buy-in to move forward with a vision for the future of investment and lifting up of people who are the most vulnerable in those communities in a way that the community can accept and support. Those are communities that I'm convinced are going to have the best time and be the most successful in changing outcomes for the folks who need it most. So I want to say, first of all, thank you for all of the work that y'all are doing, for doing that work, especially during this pandemic, for helping to ensure that people who have been living on the edge, who have been on the brink of eviction, or who have been unsheltered, sleeping on the streets, that they have that safe, decent, affordable place to live. I also want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to be as loud and proud an advocate for making affordable housing a priority as possible, because this is the time when we have a chance to do it, to make that investment. I want to challenge you to be a part of connecting those dots of opportunity for the people who need it. And also to get on the same page at the local, state, and federal level. You have some real champions in Washington at every level. I saw that firsthand. I also saw firsthand the kind of work that you're doing and what a difference it makes in the lives of people. I remember during my travels speaking to a man who had recently gotten an apartment of his own. And he said that he had only lived there about 12 days and told me that his only complaint was that he kept forgetting his keys. He had gotten so used to not having his own place, a place where he had to lock the door, that he would routinely leave his keys in his apartment at a place that offered permanent supportive housing. I remember talking to a single mom who told me about her own journey, and that getting affordable housing and getting into a job training program made the world of difference to her and to her children, and that she was on the kind of track she wanted to be on now in life. So thank you. And also, I hope that this conference, even though we can't do it in person, has been a chance to reflect on why you got into this in the first place. Because you have a heart and a passion for serving other people, and that you know that through your work, through your advocacy, that you can make a difference in their lives, that you're making that difference now, and that you can make an even bigger difference with the opportunities that we have right in front of us. Buena suerte. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information and a lot of really great ideas. And I want to thank you especially for lifting up the call to action and the call for all of us to be advocates, and a reminder, so many reminders of like the moments that we're in right now and the opportunities that we have. We have a few audience questions, and I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and ask one myself first. You talked about the importance of bringing together the housing sector with many other sectors, and working together with education and transportation folks and all of those other sectors to improve people's lives. I think that's brilliant. And I also think there's a lot of power there for our advocacy as well. Can you talk a little bit about, like, when you were mayor, were you ever approached by a cross-sector group of people calling on something? Or if you had been, do you think that would have made an impact? And should we be thinking and doing a little bit more of that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. One of the reasons that I bring it up was because of what I saw as HUD secretary and as mayor. One of the things that we did when I was mayor was focused on lifting up the east side of San Antonio, which had traditionally been largely African American and today is largely African American and Latinx, Latino, Latina. We launched what we called East Side Reinvestment Summits, which were intended to be for the benefit of lifting up people who lived on the East Side, because we also see, gentrification and displacement in a lot of neighborhoods. And we wanted to do things that would improve the lives of the people who had been living there, oftentimes for generations. And as part of that, we did focus on not only redevelopment and investment in existing properties and people, but also educational opportunity, transit. We invited folks from the utility districts to be a part of that. We also invited folks from the healthcare systems. And the idea was to get all of those people working together to try and improve what they were doing and improve outcomes ultimately by forging an alliance with their investment and focusing on those neighborhoods in a way that they had never focused before. When I was HUD secretary, I saw similar work, of course, with choice neighborhoods and with promise neighborhoods. And that east side of San Antonio actually was awarded, when I was mayor, a promise neighborhood and choice neighborhood grant. And I know that there are several other places that did that kind of work. So, my advice to y'all would be to continue to look at those areas that have done that. And I know that there are areas in Washington also, because I remember talking to folks who were doing this kind of collaborative work there, and specifically in Seattle and Tacoma. And so I think you have some great examples there.
Great, thank you. So we'll get through as many questions as we can. We probably won't get to all of them. The first one I'm going to ask is that you spoke to a little bit before when you talked about partisanship and the partisan nature of some of these debates. The question is, with investments in affordable housing providing such good returns in the form of economic growth, housing for people who need it, savings in healthcare and other public services, and I had with the housing crisis and homelessness obviously impacting people all along, everywhere on the political spectrum. Why does it seem to be such a divisive issue? Why does it seem to be such a partisan issue? Is there an ideology at play here? Is it all about the money? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would say that probably because affordable housing still has a stigma in the minds of a lot of people. And I think that especially folks who it's my hunch, I have not represented suburban communities, but I mean, the history of our country and its development pattern was that certain neighborhoods, more affluent neighborhoods, and also affluent suburbs didn't want affordable housing. And so oftentimes the people traditionally elected from there, even if they weren't hostile to it, they didn't see it as a big part of their agenda. Didn't think of the need for it in the communities they represented, and then sometimes we're hostile to it, indeed. And so there wasn't a sense of urgency. I think what's changing is you see the suburbanization of poverty and the need more and more for affordable housing opportunity everywhere, not just in the big city, but in these suburbs. That's one thing. Secondly, as I mentioned in my remarks, you have people that are getting elected to those local city councils and county councils that may be more receptive because of their ideology, their partisanship, may be more willing to listen to the needs of the most vulnerable and make those investments, or at least allow those investments in to their communities. I think that the organizations that do best in terms of their lobbying are those organizations that make the point that it doesn't matter whether people are Republican or Democrat, that this is an issue affecting everybody. And when groups organize people, they don't organize just on Republican or Democrat. And I think that among just regular people, whether even folks who are conservative, you will get a listening ear when you talk about rent going up, or how somebody can actually be able to own a home. And more Americans have found themselves, Americans who are middle class have found themselves in a vulnerable position over these last 18 months that they didn't think they would ever be in, than we've seen in a long time. Think about all those lines that we saw at food banks, for instance, and how many people in surveys told those food bank operators that they never thought that they would be relying on a food bank. I bet that that goes also for people that tapped rental assistance dollars and similar programs. That's why I do think that we have this opportunity to build a stronger coalition, including to some extent across partisan lines right now.
Thank you. Can't totally read this question. I'm going to try it though. Within the intent of fair housing frameworks, how do we address the legal apprehension we're experiencing with efforts to target programs and resources to BIPOC households with home ownership? We can do proactive affirmative marketing and community preference, but those efforts may fall short of really focusing on closing the home ownership gap and hence possibly the wealth gap, especially in hot markets where supply is a major issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a great question. And I think that we need as much systemic change as possible, right? Within FHFA, at the VA, FHA, in everything from the algorithms that they use to their work with big banks. I think we need as much systemic change as possible. And also, we need to move forward as boldly as possible. Yes, sometimes there are legal concerns, but the last big case, at least, was a case that we won, right, on disparate impact. And so my advice would be to move forward as boldly as you possibly can, to recognize that there's still a lot of unfinished business when it comes to fair housing and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And that it does help having a supportive administration, having a supportive statewide administration there in Washington. We have the other end of it here in Texas. But for those places that are operating both under a federal government and state government that are supportive, even though, I know that in this question, understood is that you can face a lawsuit from private parties, right? And sometimes the judicial environment is not as supportive as the elected or legislative environment or executive one. But be bold, because I believe that there's sufficient precedent there and continued need that we should be bold.
Thank you. A little different topic. Do you have any advice on how we get elected officials to understand homelessness and housing instability as a public health crisis? So really back to the, bringing together the way that housing is a foundational for every aspect of life, as you said before.
I think it starts with showing them that. And I know a lot of organizations do that work, right? They make sure that their local city council member or state representative or county commissioner, that's what they're called in Texas, supervisor, I guess. But show them the need. Physically start with showing them the need. That's where, to me, at least as a policymaker along the way, I was able to develop a better concrete understanding of what people were talking about. And it helps also when you connect that with the voices of people directly who are experiencing these things, who are their constituents, right? A lot of times the politician, when they think of people who are homeless, a lot of times they don't connect that with a voter. And these people move along, like who votes and how much danger they feel in not serving people who are gonna, if they don't serve them, they're gonna go out and vote against them. And so humanize the situation, humanize the people that are involved, and also make very crystal clear the connection between that person and the fact that they're a constituent, that they should be served. And then, finally, I would say, always look for the policymakers that are passionate about it on a body, on a city council, on a county commission, in the state legislature. And I say use, join up with, collaborate with that policymaker to try and impress upon their colleagues as much as possible the need to make these investments. But do it as a coalition. It doesn't work as well if you do it without that official support, or that policymaker is just a voice in the wind, on their city council or their state legislature trying to get dollars or new investment or whatever it is. You need to work as a coalition. And I know that, of course, we have, the continuums of care and organizations like these that are putting this on, that can help with that build coalitions all the time.
Thank you. We've got a question from David, who's asking, do you have any ideas about how to make housing more accessible and better adapted to the needs of cultural minorities who are experiencing homelessness? And the example he gives is American Sign Language users who are deaf or deaf and blind.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I think that starts with being more inclusive in the policymaking process, because oftentimes, of course, many of the folks, the vast majority of folks who are making policy decisions and resource distribution decisions do not have that experience. They don't live as individuals who are blind or who cannot hear. And oftentimes there's a willingness, a wanting to do what they can, but they're not educated in the nuances of this. And there's no better way to do that than to ensure that when appointments to these boards are made and when input is sought, that input and those appointments include people who have those experiences. In some places, that's a requirement, when input is sought or when board appointments are made. But in many places, it's not. And so formalizing that makes sense. I also think that this is an area where the federal government needs to catch up to, its commitment to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Oftentimes when many folks think about the ADA, right, they think about it in regard to infrastructure, other types of infrastructure. And there's been a lot of work on housing, but I don't think that there's been enough of an impression yet on how pressing that is with regard to cultural sensitivity to people who have different disabilities. So build those coalitions, try and get those appointments, and make sure that the input is there when decisions are made.
Thank you. I think we have one more question here, and then we'll move towards wrapping up. What progress is being made to bring the HUD definition, or is any progress being made to bring the HUD definition and McKinney-Vento definition on homelessness into alignment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that work continues.
Mm-hmm.
To the goal that we had in the Obama administration was to try and reconcile these different approaches on measuring homelessness. And then also, as a consequence of that, fully dedicate the resources that we need to dedicate to address it. And, I haven't spoken with Secretary Fudge directly on this issue, or with Secretary Becerra or Cardona, but I have no doubt that this administration shares that sentiment of trying to ensure that there is alignment, and ultimately that's matched with an important resource commitment. I think the advantage that they have is that they could be on the cusp of actually making a huge resource investment. And what better time, than now, essentially, to help align that approach.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. So I want to make one quick plug. You talked about the importance of people who are elected at the local level, and that shifting a little bit to people who may be more aligned with the kind of things that we want to see. I just want to remind everybody here, there is a local election almost guaranteed in your community this year. Pay attention to who's asking for your vote and ask them what they're going to do on affordable housing and homelessness. And make that one of your primary things that you make your decision based on. And then before we wrap up, and I hand it to my good friend and colleague, Bill Rumpf, you have given us so much today to both think about, and maybe more than that, a lot to do. Do you want to just make like one last call to action? If folks could take, 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, we have such an opportunity at the federal level. What would you like folks to do in the next day or two?
I mean, full court press on getting the Build Back Better Act done. If we can get that done, then that's going to be key to addressing so many of these challenges. And so, I mean, what you can do is not only I know that your home state senators are very supportive, but these organizations that are part of the Zoom, they reach not only Washington, but far beyond that in your networks. Activate those networks, push and push and push as much as you can, so that Congress is able to come together and to pass something. Hey, look, I wanted it to be 6 trillion. I want it to be 3.5 trillion. I also know that it's very likely there's going to have to be a compromise here to get something done. But still, affordable housing has to be a priority. And so do a full court press, activate your networks, that affordable housing is a priority as they negotiate a compromise that they will negotiate. That's what I think we can do.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your leadership, your many, many years of work in this area. And I wish we could have a virtual round of applause, but know that people are thanking you in the comments and appreciating you in the comments on the session platform. So with that, I will hand it over to Bill Rumpf. Thank you, Bill, and bye-bye, Julián.
We greatly appreciate Julián Castro being with us today. Thank you for your savvy insights and the challenge you posed to us. My name is Bill Rumpf. I'm the chair of the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. It's been a truly inspiring 2 days. It's been rewarding to come together to tackle with courage and commitment all the challenges we face in affordable housing through a lens of equity and inclusion. Before we say goodbye, I want to take just a minute to share a special goodbye and appreciation from the Housing Finance Commission. As many of you may know, the Commission is losing 2 major longtime leaders to retirement. First, Paul Edwards, our Deputy Director, who for 23 years has been a pillar of our executive team and leader of our affiliate agencies, and also retiring by the end of the year, is Bob Cook, our Senior Finance Director, who has steered the Commission through 25 years of clean audits and huge growth in volume, and developed numerous innovative financing programs. Paul and Bob, we know you will be missed not only by your fellow staff and commissioners, but by those across our industry who have been lucky to work with you. Thank you both, and our very best wishes. Now, on behalf of the Housing Finance Commission, our co-presenter, the Washington State Department of Commerce, and our advocacy partner, the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, we thank you for joining us for these critical conversations around housing. We need all of you to create meaningful change. If you know someone who wasn't here today, but who may be interested in the sessions or the speakers, please encourage them to go ahead and register for free. Registration will remain open for the next few weeks, and anyone who registers will have access to all the recorded sessions on demand, as will all of you. A reminder to please be sure we hear your voice by completing the online evaluations and share your ideas for next year's conference. The feedback forms are at housingwa.org, and every comment is read and discussed. Final note of gratitude to our generous sponsors whose support was instrumental in helping us deliver this year's conference virtual and free. So the Housing Washington Conference is now over for 2021, but the very vital Conference on Ending Homelessness will continue this afternoon and resume tomorrow morning. So from Housing Washington, thank you for all you do and have a great day.